My husband accused me of sleeping with his father, then abandoned us for 5 years with no child support while I raised 2 kids alone. Now, he showed up demanding to move in and threatening custody of kids he abandoned? My husband Kyle accused me of sleeping with his father when our son was 2 years old. His evidence? His dad Frank loved spending time with our son. That's it. Frank would visit every weekend, bring toys, teach him to throw a baseball, read him stories, normal grandfather stuff. But Kyle got it in his head that Frank was too attached to be just a grandfather. One night, Kyle came home drunk from poker night and started screaming that our son looked more like Frank than him. Same nose, same eyes, same laugh. I was 8 months pregnant with our second child when he said this. He demanded I admit to the affair. When I told him he was insane, he packed a bag and left. Moved in with his brother Wade. Told everyone in his family I'd been cheating with Frank. His mother Gloria called me crying, asking how I could do this to her family. Frank was devastated. Stopped visiting entirely because Kyle threatened to beat him up if he came near his son again. I was pregnant, alone with a toddler, and my husband had just destroyed his own family over a delusion. But I didn't have time to fall apart. I had bills to pay and kids to raise. I went back to work 2 weeks after giving birth. Found a daycare that opened at 6 a.m. so I could drop the kids off before my shift at the hospital. I'm a radiologic technologist. Good money, stable hours. Kyle never paid child support. Said he wasn't paying for kids that might not be his. I didn't chase him for it. Just worked overtime every week. Picked up weekend shifts. My kids didn't need a father who thought so little of their mother. 5 years passed. My son is 7 now. Daughter is 5. I got promoted to lead technologist. Bought a small house on my own. Nothing special, but it's ours. The kids are thriving. My son plays Little League, straight A student. My daughter does gymnastics. Kyle never called. Never visited. Missed every birthday, every Christmas, every school play. Frank would send cards and money for birthdays through my sister because he was too scared of Kyle to contact me directly. Then last month, Kyle shows up at my door. Not to apologize. Not to see the kids he abandoned. He lost his job 8 months ago. His girlfriend kicked him out. He's been living with Wade, but Wade's wife wants him gone. He needs a place to stay. Oh, and he's been thinking, and maybe he overreacted about the whole Frank thing. Maybe we should try again. For the kids. I stood there staring at him. This man who destroyed our marriage with insane accusations, who abandoned his children, who let me struggle alone for 5 years, was standing on my porch asking to move in. I told him absolutely not. That's when he got nasty. Started saying I owed him. That he was entitled to half the house since we're still technically married. That he wanted split custody now. That he'd been generous letting me have the kids all this time, but now he wanted his rights as a father. Every day since then, he's been escalating, calling 20 times a day, showing up at my work, telling the kids' school he should be allowed to pick them up, leaving messages saying he'll take me to court for alienation, that I poisoned the kids against him, that he'll prove I'm an unfit mother working too many hours. Yesterday was the final straw. He called and said Frank agreed to take a paternity test to prove Kyle was right all along, that when it showed our son was Frank's, he'd get full custody of our daughter, and I'd owe him alimony for the emotional damage. I called Frank immediately. He was confused, said Kyle never contacted him about any test. Kyle was lying about his own father to try to scare me. I hung up and called my friend Jasmine. She's a paralegal. Asked her to meet me at Kyle's brother's house with separation papers I'd been sitting on for 5 years. Time to end this properly. We drove over at dinner time. I knew the whole family would be there. Wade's house, Sunday dinner. Gloria always cooks. I knocked. Wade answered, saw me, and his face went pale. The dining room was full. Gloria, Wade's wife Melanie, Kyle's sister Helen, and Kyle sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place. Kyle stood up smiling. Changed your mind about letting me come home? He said. I placed the separation papers on the table. Actually, I came to give you these. And to let your family know that Kyle's been harassing me for weeks, demanding money, demanding the house I bought myself, threatening to take the kids he abandoned. Oh, and lying about Frank taking a paternity test. Gloria gasped. Gloria's face went white and her fingers dug into the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned pale. Wade pushed his chair back and stood up slow, staring at me like he was seeing something he didn't want to believe. Melanie's hand flew to cover her mouth and her eyes went wide. Helen looked back and forth between Kyle and me, and I could see understanding spreading across her face that something was very wrong here. The whole room got quiet except for the sound of someone's fork hitting their plate. Kyle tried to laugh, but it came out weird and forced. He waved his hand at me like I was being silly. She's just being dramatic, he said. We need to talk about this privately, not in front of everyone. Wade cut him off before he could say anything else. Have you been harassing her? His voice was flat and hard. And did you lie about Dad agreeing to take a paternity test? Kyle's whole face turned red, starting at his neck and spreading up to his forehead. He started making excuses fast, talking over Wade. She abandoned me first. She refused to admit the truth about what she did with Dad. I had every right to leave. She forced me out. Gloria interrupted him and her voice shook. What truth, Kyle? She just said Frank never agreed to any test. What truth are you talking about? I kept my voice calm even though my heart was beating, so fast I could feel it in my throat. Kyle showed up at my house last month demanding to move in. He hasn't called or visited the kids in 5 years. He never paid a single dollar in child support. When I told him no, he started threatening me. Said he'd take the kids. Said he was entitled to half my house even though I bought it myself with money I earned working overtime for 5 years while he was gone. Then he made up that lie about Frank taking a paternity test to scare me into giving him what he wants. Melanie spoke up then, and her voice was tight. Gloria, Kyle has been living with us for 8 months. He doesn't help with bills. He doesn't look for work. He just plays video games all day and complains about how unfair his life is. I told Wade 2 weeks ago that Kyle needed to leave our house. Wade nodded and looked at his mother. He's been talking for weeks about getting back together with her. Not because he loves her or misses his kids, because he needs somewhere to live and he thinks he's entitled to the house she bought. Gloria turned to Kyle and her voice cracked. Is this true? Kyle exploded. He slammed his hands on the table and stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You all turned against me. She poisoned you just like she poisoned my kids. You're all supposed to be my family, but you believe her over me. Jasmine had her phone out and I saw her hit the record button. She held it low by her side where Kyle couldn't see it, but the camera was pointed right at him while he yelled. The front door opened and Frank walked in. Gloria must have texted him to come for dinner. He froze in the doorway when he saw me standing there. His face went pale. Kyle saw him and something snapped. He lunged toward Frank, screaming, You ruined my life! You took everything from me! Wade grabbed Kyle around the chest and held him back. Kyle was still trying to get to Frank, his arms swinging. Helen jumped up and started yelling for everyone to calm down, but nobody was listening. I looked at Frank and my chest felt tight. I'm sorry for bringing this to your family dinner. But I needed witnesses to hear the truth about what Kyle's been doing. How he's been harassing me and threatening to take the kids he abandoned. Frank's eyes filled up with tears and his voice came out rough. Does this mean I can see my grandchildren again? That question broke something in Gloria. She started crying, her whole body shaking. She pressed her hands to her face. How did I let my son convince me that you would do something so horrible? I haven't seen my grandchildren in 5 years because I believed his lies. What kind of mother am I? What kind of grandmother? Helen stared at Kyle with her mouth hanging open, and she looked like she just figured out her brother had been lying to everyone for years. Wade stood up and moved closer to Gloria like he wanted to be ready to catch her if she fell over. Melanie stayed in her chair, but her hands were flat on the table, and I could see her knuckles turning white from how hard she was pressing down. Kyle looked around the room at all of them staring at him, and I watched his face change. The anger drained out, and suddenly his eyes got wet, and his voice came out shaky. He said he knew he messed up, but he was still their father, and he deserved another chance. That I was being mean, keeping his kids away from him. That they needed their dad even if he made mistakes. Gloria wiped her eyes with her napkin and looked at him like she wanted to believe him, but couldn't quite make herself do it. Wade shook his head slowly, and Frank just stood there, frozen in the doorway. Jasmine moved forward then, and pulled a folder out of her bag. She walked right up to Kyle and put the papers down in front of him on the table. Her voice was calm and professional when she explained that these were separation papers, and he had 30 days to respond. That his harassment was now on record with multiple witnesses who heard him tonight. That his threats about custody would be included in the official filing. Kyle stared at the papers like they might bite him, and his face went red again. Wade spoke up before Kyle could start yelling. He told Kyle straight out that he needed to pack his things tonight and leave their house. That Wade couldn't have someone living with him who treated family this way and lied about their own father. Melanie nodded hard and added that Kyle had 1 hour to get his stuff and go, or she was calling the police right now. Kyle turned on Wade then, and his voice got loud and nasty. He called Wade a traitor and said the whole family would regret picking my side over his. That they were all going to be sorry when he proved he was right about everything. Helen stood up and told Kyle to stop making threats and just leave already. Gloria was crying harder now, and Frank moved into the room and put his hand on her shoulder. I looked at Jasmine and tilted my head toward the door. We walked out together while Kyle was still yelling behind us about how unfair everyone was being. I heard Wade's voice getting louder, telling Kyle to shut up and start packing. Gloria followed us outside onto the porch, and she was shaking. She grabbed my hand, and her fingers were cold and damp from crying. She said through her tears that she should have questioned Kyle's story 5 years ago. That she was a fool for believing him, and she missed so much of her grandchildren's lives because of it. That she was so sorry for everything. I pulled my hand back gently and took a breath. I told her honestly that I appreciated her saying sorry, but I needed time to think about all of this. That Tucker and Doris were my only priority, and I had to protect them. That I would need to see real change from everyone before I let people back into their lives. Gloria nodded and wiped her face with both hands. She said she understood, and she would wait as long as it took if it meant she could see her grandchildren again someday. Jasmine and I got in her car and drove away. I could see Wade's house in the side mirror getting smaller, and I felt this weird mix of relief and exhaustion. My phone started buzzing before we even got to the end of the street, and I looked down to see Kyle calling already. I hit decline and turned my phone to silent. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 in the morning and woke me up. I grabbed it off my nightstand and saw a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice said he was Lawrence Barton and Jasmine had connected him with my case. He said he reviewed my situation last night after Jasmine sent him everything, and he wanted to meet with me today. That Kyle's threats were serious and we needed to move fast on the custody case before he tried something. I sat up in bed and my heart started beating faster. I told him I could come to his office whenever he wanted. He said 10 o'clock would work and gave me the address. I got Tucker and Doris ready for school and dropped them off early. Then I drove to Barton's office, which was in a small building near the courthouse. The waiting room had brown leather chairs and magazines on a glass table. A woman at the front desk smiled and told me to go right back to his office. Barton stood up when I walked in and shook my hand. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and glasses, and he wore a dark blue suit. He pointed to a chair across from his desk and I sat down. He opened a folder that had papers spread out inside and started talking. He explained that Kyle's 5-year abandonment actually made my case much stronger. That courts don't like parents who disappear and then show up demanding rights when it's easy for them. That judges look at patterns of behavior, and Kyle's pattern was clear. He asked me to walk him through everything from the beginning, so I told him about Kyle's accusations and how he left when I was pregnant. About the 5 years of no contact and no money. About Kyle showing up last month wanting to move in and then threatening me when I said no. Barton wrote notes the whole time I talked, and he asked questions about specific dates and details. He wanted to know about Kyle's mental state when he made the accusations about Frank. If Kyle had ever been violent or threatening before he left. I told him Kyle never hit me, but he would yell and throw things when he got drunk. That the accusations came out of nowhere one night after poker, and they didn't make any sense. Barton asked about Frank, and I explained how close Frank was with our son, and how normal that seemed to everyone except Kyle. He asked about Kyle's current situation, and I told him everything Melanie had said about Kyle living with them for 8 months, without working or helping with bills. About how Kyle admitted he lost his job, and his girlfriend kicked him out. Barton nodded and wrote more notes. He said he was building a picture of someone who was desperate and unstable, rather than actually caring about being a parent. That Kyle's timing made it obvious this was about needing a place to live and not about the children. Then Barton brought up child support and his voice got more serious. He said we could file for back support going back 5 years. That even though Kyle claimed the kids might not be his, that was never proven, and he was still legally their father. That 5 years of support could add up to a big number depending on what income we could prove Kyle had during that time. He said this might actually make Kyle back off if he realized opening this legal door would cost him money instead of getting him a free place to live. I asked if that would really work, and Barton said sometimes when people realize court means consequences for them, and not just threats against others, they suddenly lose interest in fighting. I asked Barton about the kids and whether they'd have to talk in court. My hands were shaking when I brought it up. He leaned back in his chair and said it was a last resort. That judges try to keep children out of custody battles when possible. But he explained we might need a child psychologist to evaluate them. Someone who could talk to Tucker and Doris, and write a report about what was best for them. I felt sick thinking about my kids being questioned about their father. About them having to explain to a stranger why they didn't know the man who was supposed to be their dad. Barton must have seen my face because he added that the psychologist would make it comfortable. That it wouldn't be like a courtroom interrogation. Just conversations about their life and feelings. I nodded and tried to breathe normally. I left his office around noon and drove straight to work for my afternoon shift. My phone started buzzing before I even got to the hospital. Text after text from Kyle. I pulled into the parking lot and looked at the screen. 20 messages already. The first few were almost nice. Saying we should talk. That he missed me and the kids. That he was sorry for how things went at Wade's house. Then they got angry. Demanding I call him back. Saying I had no right to embarrass him in front of his family. Accusing me of poisoning everyone against him. Then they turned pathetic. Saying he had nowhere to go. That his own family kicked him out because of me. That I owed him another chance. I remembered what Barton said about saving everything. I started taking screenshots of each message. Saved them to a folder on my phone. My hands were steady now. This was evidence. This was proof of exactly what Kyle was doing. I picked up Tucker and Doris from aftercare that evening. Tucker was quiet in the car. He kept looking at me in the rearview mirror with this worried expression. When we got home and I started making dinner, he finally spoke up. He asked why Grandma Gloria called him today. My stomach dropped. I stopped chopping vegetables and turned around. I asked what he meant. He said his teacher came and got him from recess. That there was a phone call for him in the office. That it was Grandma Gloria and she wanted to know how he was doing. She asked about school and baseball. She told him she missed him. I felt my face get hot. Gloria got my number from Wade somehow. Called the school while I was at Barton's office. Called my 7-year-old son without asking me first. I knelt down next to Tucker and tried to keep my voice calm. I told him that some family situations were complicated right now. That Grandma Gloria loved him, but things were difficult with his father. He asked if he did something wrong. I pulled him close and said no. That none of this was his fault. That grown-ups sometimes had problems that had nothing to do with kids. Doris was playing with her dolls on the living room floor. She didn't even look up during the conversation. I realized she wouldn't remember Gloria at all. She wasn't even born yet when Kyle left and everything fell apart. Tucker had some memories of his grandfather. He mentioned once that he remembered someone teaching him to catch a ball, that he remembered a man with gray hair reading him stories. But even those memories were fuzzy now. He asked me a few months ago why Grandpa Frank stopped coming over. I told him Grandpa had to move away for a while. It seemed easier than explaining that his father accused his grandfather of something terrible, that his father destroyed his own family over nothing. My phone rang 2 days later while I was loading the dishwasher. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. It was Frank. His voice was shaking. He said he hoped it was okay that he was calling, that Wade gave him my number after the dinner confrontation. He talked fast like he was scared I'd hang up. He said he didn't want to cause me more stress, that he knew I had enough to deal with, but he'd missed his grandchildren desperately for 5 years. He asked if there was any chance he could see them, even just once. I sat down at the kitchen table. I told him honestly that I believed him, that I never thought he did anything wrong, that Kyle's accusations were insane from the start. But I had to be careful right now. Kyle was threatening custody. If I let Frank around the kids and Kyle found out, he'd use it against me. He'd claim I was letting people around them that he didn't approve of, that I was being reckless with his children. Frank was quiet for a minute. Then he said he understood, that he didn't want to make things harder for me. But he asked if maybe he could write letters to Tucker and Doris. Nothing that would cause legal problems. Just letters so they'd know their grandfather loved them, that he thought about them every day, that he never wanted to stop being part of their lives. I felt tears in my eyes. I told him letters would be okay, that I'd make sure the kids got them. He thanked me about 5 times before hanging up. I sat at the table for a while after, thinking about how Kyle destroyed so many relationships, how his paranoia hurt everyone who loved him. 3 weeks went by. Work was busy. The kids had school and activities. I was starting to think maybe Kyle had backed off. Then Barton called. Kyle filed a counter motion, demanding immediate joint custody, claiming I'd been alienating him from the children, denying him his parental rights. Barton said he expected this, that we already had our response prepared, that Kyle's filing was full of holes, no evidence of alienation, no proof he'd tried to maintain contact during the 5 years he was gone, no explanation for why he suddenly cared about custody now. Barton said the court would see through it, but we still had to go through the process. The court assigned a mediator named Brad, scheduled a mandatory mediation session before any hearing could happen. Barton explained this was standard procedure, that courts want parents to try to work things out before a judge has to decide. But he doubted Kyle would be reasonable enough for mediation to actually work. He said to prepare for it to fail, to prepare for a full custody hearing. I asked how long that would take. He said probably 2 to 3 months from now, maybe longer depending on the court's schedule. I felt exhausted just thinking about it. I had my therapy appointment that Thursday. I'd been seeing someone for about a year. Started going after I got promoted and finally had good enough insurance to afford it. My therapist's office was in a small building near the hospital, comfortable chairs and soft lighting. I sat down and immediately started crying. Told her about Kyle showing up, about the threats and the custody filing, about being terrified he might actually get to take my kids. She handed me tissues and let me talk. Then she reminded me of something I kept forgetting, that I'd been a stable, loving parent for 5 years, that I worked hard and provided for my children, that they were happy and healthy and thriving, that Kyle chose to be absent, that he walked away and stayed away, that courts look at patterns of behavior and my pattern was clear. I was the parent who showed up, every single day. Kyle was the one who disappeared. I walked through my next shift in a fog, kept messing up simple things, put the wrong patient file in the scanner, forgot to mark the images I'd already reviewed. My supervisor, Maria, pulled me into her office after I nearly gave someone the wrong scan results. She closed the door and asked if everything was okay at home. I sat down and felt all the stress hit me at once. Told her my ex-husband was back after 5 years, that he was threatening custody, that I had lawyers and court dates and couldn't focus on anything. Maria's face softened. She said the hospital had resources for this kind of thing, an employee assistance program that could help with legal costs. I didn't even know that existed. She pulled out a pamphlet and circled a phone number, said I should call them, that they'd helped other people through divorces and custody battles. I thanked her and went back to work. Called the number on my lunch break. They scheduled me for an intake appointment the following week. Saturday morning came too fast. Tucker had baseball practice at 9. I packed his bag and drove to the field near the elementary school. Other parents were already setting up chairs along the fence. Tucker ran to join his teammates and I found my usual spot in the shade. The coach started warm-ups and I was checking my phone when I saw Kyle's car pull into the parking lot. My stomach dropped. He got out and started walking toward the field. I stood up fast and called Tucker over, told him to stay with his coach no matter what. Tucker's face went worried, but he nodded and ran back. Kyle reached the fence and demanded to talk to his son. I kept my voice steady and told him all contact goes through lawyers now. He needed to leave. Kyle's face turned red. He started yelling that I couldn't keep him from his own kid, that he had rights. The coach noticed the commotion and came over. Asked Kyle to leave the field. Kyle got louder. Said nobody could tell him what to do with his son. Another parent pulled out her phone. I moved between Kyle and Tucker. Told the other kids to keep playing. Kyle kept screaming about parental rights and how I'd poisoned everyone against him. The police showed up about 10 minutes later. 2 officers walked onto the field and Kyle was still ranting. They asked him to calm down and explain the situation. Kyle said I was keeping him from his son. That we were married and he had every right to be there. The officers asked me for my side. I explained we'd been separated 5 years. That Kyle paid no child support and had 0 custody arrangement. That my lawyer told me to keep him away until the court decided. The officers were professional about it. Told Kyle that without a custody order, I had full legal authority as the custodial parent. That he needed to leave and go through the proper legal channels. Kyle argued, but they weren't having it. One officer walked him back to his car while the other stayed to take my information. Said they'd file a report. Tucker was crying when I got back to him. The coach had kept the other kids busy, but everyone saw what happened. I called Barton from the parking lot after practice. Told him about Kyle showing up and the police report. Barton said this was actually good for our case. That it showed Kyle's behavior was getting worse. He'd file for a temporary restraining order right away. Use the police report as evidence. I asked how long that would take. He said usually 48 hours for emergency orders. That the judge would see Kyle was escalating and grant it fast. I felt some relief, but Tucker was quiet the whole drive home. Asked if his dad was going to keep showing up. I told him no. That the lawyers were fixing it. That he was safe. Barton called Monday afternoon. The judge granted the restraining order. Kyle couldn't come within 500 feet of me, the kids, their school, or any of their activities. Violation meant arrest. Barton emailed me a copy and I forwarded it to the school and Tucker's coach. Put one in my car and one at work. Tuesday evening, my phone rang. Gloria's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Said Wade told her about the baseball field. That she was so sorry. That she couldn't believe Kyle would do something like that. I didn't know what to say. Gloria kept talking. Said she supported whatever I needed to do to protect the children. That she was horrified by how Kyle was acting. That she understood if I never wanted to see her again. But she wanted me to know she was on my side. I thanked her and hung up. Sat on the couch for a while trying to process that his own mother was turning against him. The mediation session was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Barton met me in the lobby of the mediator's office. Brad Sanford came out at 2:15. Said Kyle wasn't there yet. We waited another 20 minutes before Kyle showed up. He smelled like alcohol. His shirt was wrinkled and he had dark circles under his eyes. Brad tried to start by explaining the ground rules, but Kyle interrupted. Said I'd turned his whole family against him. That his own mother was siding with me. Brad asked him to let everyone speak. Kyle kept talking over him. Barton sat there calm while Kyle ranted about betrayal and lies, and how nobody understood what he'd been through. Brad finally got Kyle quiet enough to ask what he wanted from mediation. Kyle said he wanted 50-50 custody, half the value of the house. Back payment for emotional damages from the 5 years I'd kept his kids from him. Barton waited until Kyle finished. Then he pulled out a folder. Read off the facts in this calm voice. 0 child support paid in 5 years. No stable housing or employment. Abandoned the family based on false accusations. Recent harassment and violation of boundaries. The police report from the baseball field. Kyle's face got redder with each point. Brad turned to Kyle and asked him directly what his plan was for housing the children during his custody time. Where would they sleep? How would he support them? Kyle got defensive. Said he'd figure it out. That I was just trying to make him look bad. That he'd find a place and a job once he had his kids back. Brad wrote something down. Kyle kept going. Said I was manipulating everyone. That the whole system was rigged against fathers. That nobody cared about his side of the story. I sat there and let him talk. Watched him destroy his own case with every word. Brad looked at me and nodded, like he wanted to hear my side. I took a breath and made myself speak clearly. I told him my children have stability and routine and security. They have a home where they know they're safe. They have schedules and friends and activities. Kyle can't just show up after 5 years and demand to break all that apart because he needs somewhere to live. That's not what a parent does. A parent puts their kids first, not themselves. Brad wrote something down while Kyle's face turned red. Kyle started yelling that I was twisting everything, that I was making him sound like some deadbeat when he was just trying to be a father. Barton stayed calm and pointed out that Kyle had 5 years to be a father and chose not to. Kyle shoved his chair back and stood up. He leaned across the table toward me with his fists clenched. Barton moved fast and got between us while Brad grabbed his phone and called for security. Kyle was screaming that I ruined his life, that I poisoned everyone against him, that I was going to pay for this. Security came in and escorted Kyle out while he was still yelling threats. Brad sat back down and rubbed his face. He said the mediation was over and he'd be filing a report with the court. He told Barton that given Kyle's aggression, he'd recommend the case move straight to a custody hearing without any more attempts at mediation. Barton thanked him, and we left. I was shaking in the parking lot. Barton put his hand on my shoulder and said that actually went better than expected, because now the court had witnessed Kyle's behavior firsthand. 3 days later, I got a call from Liz Cardenas. She was the child psychologist the court appointed to evaluate the situation. She wanted to meet with me first to understand the family history before she talked to Tucker and Doris. I met her at her office on a Tuesday afternoon. She was maybe 50 with gray hair and kind eyes. Her office had comfortable chairs and toys in the corner. She asked me to start from the beginning and tell her everything. I gave her copies of documents I'd brought. Bank statements showing I paid for everything alone. School records with only my name on them. Medical records listing me as the only parent. The police report from the baseball field. Screenshots of Kyle's threatening texts. Frank's birthday cards he'd sent through my sister. I walked her through Kyle's accusation 5 years ago. How he abandoned us when I was 8 months pregnant. How he never paid child support or visited. How he only came back when he needed something from me. Liz took notes and asked questions. She wanted to know how Tucker and Doris were doing in the school, what their daily routines looked like, whether they'd asked about their father over the years. I told her Tucker used to ask when he was younger but stopped around age 5 when he realized his dad wasn't coming back. Doris never knew Kyle at all. She wasn't even born yet when he left. The next week, Liz met with Tucker and Doris at her office. I drove them there but waited in the lobby while she talked to each of them separately. Tucker went first and was in there for almost an hour. When he came out, he looked tired but okay. Doris went next and was only in there about 30 minutes. Liz walked them back to me and said she'd be in touch with both lawyers once she finished her assessment. Later that week, Liz called Barton and shared her initial findings with him. He called me right after to tell me what she said. Tucker had been clear and articulate about not remembering his father from when he was little. He told Liz about Kyle showing up at baseball and how scared he felt. He said he didn't understand why his dad left, or why he came back now. Doris told Liz she didn't have a dad and seemed confused about why she had to talk about someone she'd never met. Liz said both kids were well-adjusted and doing great in the school and activities. She said they were securely attached to me and showed obvious signs of anxiety whenever Kyle was mentioned. Her preliminary recommendation was that the children needed stability, and any contact with Kyle should be extremely limited if it happened at all. Barton scheduled a conference call with Kyle's attorney to discuss Liz's findings. I wasn't on the call, but Barton told me afterward what happened. Kyle's attorney tried to argue that Tucker and Doris only felt negative about Kyle because I'd been alienating them for 5 years. That I'd poisoned them against their father and that's why they were anxious. Liz apparently shut that down immediately. She told both attorneys that 5 years of voluntary abandonment can't be blamed on the custodial parent. She said children don't forget a parent who was present and loving. They forget a parent who chose not to be there. She said my documented care and Kyle's documented absence spoke for themselves. Barton said Kyle's attorney got quiet after that and the call ended pretty fast. 2 weeks before the custody hearing was scheduled, something unexpected happened. Frank sent letters to Tucker and Doris. Beautiful letters with photos from when Tucker was little. Photos of Frank holding baby Tucker, teaching him to walk, playing in the yard. Frank wrote about how much he loved being their grandpa and how much he'd missed them. He told Tucker he was sorry he had to stay away, but that he thought about them every single day. He sent Doris a letter too, even though she was too young to remember him, telling her about the day she was born and how happy he was to have a granddaughter. Tucker read his letter at the kitchen table after school and started crying. He asked me if Grandpa Frank really had to stay away all this time. I sat down next to him and tried to explain it as simply as I could. I told him his father made a mistake and accused Grandpa Frank of something that wasn't true. That's why Grandpa stopped visiting, because his father got angry and told him to stay away. I said sometimes adults make bad choices that hurt everyone around them, especially kids who don't deserve it. Tucker looked at the photos for a long time. He said he remembered Grandpa Frank a little bit now that he saw the pictures. He asked if he could write back. I helped Tucker write a letter to Frank. He told him about school and how he was doing in math and reading. He wrote about baseball and his team making the playoffs. He told Frank about his favorite video games and the new bike he got for his birthday. Doris wanted to send something too, even though she didn't remember Frank, so she drew a picture of our house with all of us standing in front. She drew herself and Tucker and me and added a figure she labeled Grandpa with gray hair. I put both the letter and the drawing in an envelope and mailed it to Frank's address. Frank called me 2 days after he got Tucker's letter. He was crying so hard he could barely talk. He kept saying thank you over and over. He said getting that letter was the best thing that had happened to him in 5 years. He said reading about Tucker's life and seeing Doris's drawing made him feel like maybe he hadn't lost them forever. He asked if there was any chance of seeing them in person once the legal situation was settled. I told him I wanted that too, but we had to wait until after the custody hearing. I didn't want to give Kyle any ammunition to use against me in court. Frank understood. He said he'd wait as long as it took if it meant he could be a grandpa again. The custody hearing was set for a Thursday morning 3 weeks after Frank sent his letters. I took the day off work and met Barton outside the courthouse at 8:30. He carried 2 thick folders full of documentation and wore a dark suit that made him look professional and serious. Kyle showed up 10 minutes late wearing a suit I recognized as Wade's because the sleeves were too short and the shoulders didn't fit right. His hair was greasy and he had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His attorney was a younger guy named Derek Sullivan, who looked fresh out of law school and kept glancing nervously at his notes. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom waiting for the judge. Kyle kept staring at me, but I focused on Barton's folders and tried to keep my hands from shaking. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Sandra Reeves, who had a reputation for being fair, but tough on parents who abandoned their kids. She called the case and asked both attorneys to present their opening statements. Derek stood up and talked about parental rights and second chances. He said Kyle made mistakes, but he was still the father and deserved the opportunity to rebuild his relationship with his children. He mentioned that Kyle had been going through a difficult time, but was ready to step up now and be the dad Tucker and Doris needed. The whole speech felt empty, because Derek never once mentioned a concrete plan for where Kyle would live or how he would support the kids during his custody time. Barton stood up next and his voice was calm and measured. He started laying out the facts in chronological order. 5 years ago, Kyle accused me of having an affair with his own father based on zero evidence. Kyle left when I was 8 months pregnant with our second child. Kyle never paid a single dollar of child support in 5 years. Kyle never called, never visited, missed every birthday and holiday and school event. I worked full-time as a radiologic technologist and got promoted to lead tech while raising 2 kids completely alone. I bought a house on my own. The kids were thriving in the school and activities. Kyle only reappeared when he lost his job, and his girlfriend kicked him out and needed somewhere to live. Barton opened his first folder and started pulling out documents. Bank statements showing my sole financial support of the household for 5 years. Medical records showing I took Tucker and Doris to every checkup and handled every illness. School records showing excellent grades and attendance. Receipts for baseball equipment and gymnastics classes. Photos of birthday parties and Christmas mornings that Kyle missed. The police reports from when Kyle showed up at Tucker's baseball practice and had to be escorted away by officers. The documentation of Kyle's harassment calls and threatening messages. Liz's psychological evaluation stating the children showed anxiety when discussing their father and recommending limited contact. Judge Reeves took notes while Barton presented everything. Kyle's face got redder with each document and Derek looked increasingly uncomfortable. The judge asked if I was prepared to testify and I said yes, even though my stomach was doing flips. I took the witness stand and Barton asked me to describe what happened 5 years ago. I explained about Kyle's accusations and how Frank stopped visiting because Kyle threatened him. I talked about being pregnant and alone with a toddler and going back to work 2 weeks after giving birth because I had bills to pay. I described the daycare that opened at 6 in the morning and working overtime every week and picking up weekend shifts. I told the judge about buying the house on my own and getting promoted at work and watching my kids grow up without their father because he chose not to be there. Barton asked about Kyle's recent behavior, and I described him showing up demanding to move in, threatening to take the kids, calling 20 times a day, showing up at my work, lying about Frank agreeing to a paternity test. I stayed calm and factual the whole time even though talking about it made me want to cry. Derek tried to cross-examine me and asked if I ever tried to contact Kyle or encourage him to see the kids. I said no because he made it clear he didn't think they were his, and I wasn't going to beg someone to be a parent to children he abandoned. Kyle took the stand next, and it went bad fast. Derek asked him why he stayed away for 5 years, and Kyle started making excuses about how he needed time to process his feelings and figure things out. The judge interrupted and asked directly if he ever paid child support. Kyle said no because he wasn't sure the kids were his. Judge Reeves asked if he ever took a paternity test to find out, and Kyle admitted he never did. She asked why not, and Kyle got defensive and said I should have offered to do one to prove I wasn't cheating. Derek tried to redirect and asked about Kyle's current plans for custody. Kyle said he wanted the kids every other week and that he'd find an apartment once he had them. Judge Reeves asked where he was living now, and Kyle said with his brother, but he was looking for his own place. She asked about his employment, and Kyle said he was between jobs but had some interviews lined up. She asked how he planned to support 2 children without income or housing, and Kyle's voice got louder. He said he'd figure it out and that I was just trying to make him look bad because I wanted to punish him. Judge Reeves asked about the accusations against Frank, and Kyle started rambling about how Frank was too attached to Tucker and how they looked alike, and how everyone could see something was wrong. The judge asked if he had any actual evidence of an affair, and Kyle said it was obvious to anyone paying attention. She asked again for specific evidence, and Kyle started crying. He said his whole life had been hard, and nobody understood what he'd been through, and everyone was against him. Derek looked mortified and tried to salvage things by asking Kyle if he loved his children. Kyle said yes, of course he did, but then started talking about how I poisoned them against him, and turned his whole family against him, and made everyone think he was crazy. Judge Reeves stopped him and asked about the baseball field incident. Kyle said he just wanted to see his son, and I was being unreasonable. She asked if he understood why the police were called, and Kyle said no, because he had rights as a father. The judge called a short recess, and Kyle stormed past me without looking. Barton squeezed my shoulder and said it went as well as we could have hoped. When we came back, Derek called Gloria as a character witness. I held my breath because I wasn't sure what she would say even after everything that happened at Wade's house. Gloria took the stand looking older and tired. Derek asked her to describe Kyle as a son and father. Gloria was quiet for a moment and then said Kyle was her son and she loved him, but she needed to tell the truth. She said Kyle made serious false accusations against his own father 5 years ago. She said she was ashamed that she believed those accusations without questioning them. She said Frank was a good man who loved his grandchildren and did nothing wrong. She said Kyle's recent behavior scared her, and she was worried about his mental state. She said the children deserved stability and safety, and right now Kyle couldn't provide either of those things. Derek looked shocked and tried to get Gloria to say something positive, but she just kept repeating that she loved her son but couldn't support him getting custody when he wasn't stable. Kyle stood up and yelled that his own mother was betraying him. Judge Reeves told him to sit down and be quiet, or she'd have him removed. The bailiff stood up and Kyle sat back down, but he was shaking with anger. Judge Reeves said she'd take 2 weeks to review everything and issue a ruling. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years. I couldn't sleep and barely ate and kept checking my phone waiting for Barton to call. Tucker asked me every day if his dad was going to take him away, and I had to keep saying I didn't know. Doris had nightmares and crawled into my bed most nights. The ruling came on a Tuesday afternoon. Barton called me at work and I had to go sit in my car to take the call. He said I got sole legal and physical custody. Kyle got supervised visitation only 2 hours every other Saturday at a supervised visitation center. He had to complete anger management classes and parenting classes before the visitation could be reconsidered. Kyle was also ordered to start paying child support based on something called imputed income, since he was voluntarily unemployed. The amount was $200 a month, which wasn't much, but it was something. The back support from the last 5 years was deferred until Kyle got a job, but not forgiven, meaning he'd still owe it eventually. I sat in my car crying with relief for 20 minutes before I could pull myself together enough to go back inside. That night, I told Tucker and Doris that they were staying with me and everything was going to be okay. Tucker hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and Doris asked if the bad man was going away now. I said yes, and we ordered pizza and watched movies until way past bedtime. 3 days later, Barton called again. Derek had contacted him saying Kyle wanted to appeal the custody decision. Barton explained to Derek that appealing was expensive and rarely successful, especially when the evidence of abandonment was so clear. He said most appeals in custody cases failed unless there was clear legal error by the judge, and there wasn't any here. We never heard anything more about an appeal after that. Kyle's first supervised visit was scheduled for the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. The supervised visitation center was a plain building with cameras in every room and staff members who watched every interaction. I dropped Tucker and Doris off and waited in my car in the parking lot because I couldn't leave the area in case something went wrong. Tucker looked nervous walking in, and Doris held the supervisor's hand tight. 30 minutes later, the supervisor came out and asked me to come inside. She said Kyle had left. Tucker was sitting on a couch looking confused, and Doris was hiding behind another staff member. The supervisor said Kyle tried to hug both kids right away, but Tucker stepped back and Doris started crying. Kyle got frustrated and said they were being ridiculous. He tried to talk to Tucker about school, but Tucker gave short answers and kept looking at the door. Kyle asked Doris to sit on his lap, and she refused. After about 25 minutes, Kyle stood up and said this was pointless if the kids were going to act like he was a stranger. He told the supervisor to tell me I was doing this on purpose, and then he walked out. The supervisor said she'd write a report for the court, noting that Kyle seemed unprepared for actual parenting, and left when the children didn't immediately respond the way he wanted. She said the kids hadn't done anything wrong, and their reactions were completely normal for children who didn't know their father. I took Tucker and Doris home, and we made cookies and didn't talk about what happened. Kyle missed his next scheduled visit 2 weeks later. The center called me that morning to let me know he never showed up. He missed the visit after that, too. The center sent notices to the court each time documenting his failure to appear. Barton called and said this was common with parents who wanted custody for the wrong reasons. Once they realized being a parent required actual work and consistency, they disappeared again. He said we'd monitor the situation, but Kyle's pattern of abandonment was continuing just like before. 3 months after the hearing, I called Frank and asked if he wanted to come over on Saturday afternoon. My hands shook while I dialed because I knew this was huge for him and terrifying for the kids. Frank answered on the first ring and his voice cracked when he said yes. I told Tucker that evening that his grandpa was coming to visit, and Tucker went quiet for a long time before asking if the bad man would be there too. I promised Kyle wouldn't be anywhere near us, and Tucker nodded, but I could see he was nervous. Doris asked who Grandpa Frank was, and my heart broke a little because she had no memory of him at all. Saturday came and I cleaned the house twice even though it didn't need it. Tucker kept looking out the window, and Doris stayed close to me asking questions about this grandpa person she was about to meet. Frank knocked at exactly 2 o'clock, and when I opened the door he had tears in his eyes and a stuffed elephant in his hands. Tucker hung back behind me, and Frank didn't rush forward or try to hug him. He just said hello and that he'd missed Tucker very much. Doris peeked around my legs, and Frank knelt down slowly and held out the elephant, saying he heard she liked animals. She took it carefully and held it close without saying anything. I invited Frank inside, and we sat in the living room where everything felt stiff and awkward at first. Frank asked Tucker about school and baseball, and Tucker gave short answers while watching Frank like he might do something scary. Frank pulled out photos from when Tucker was little, and Tucker moved closer to look at them. There was one of Frank teaching Tucker to throw a ball when Tucker was maybe 3, and Tucker touched the photo gently. Frank's voice shook when he explained how much he'd wanted to keep visiting but couldn't because of the situation with Kyle. Doris climbed onto the couch next to Frank with her elephant and asked if he was really her grandpa. Frank said yes. and that he'd wanted to meet her since the day she was born. After about an hour, Tucker asked if Frank wanted to play catch outside, and Frank looked at me with such hope that I had to look away. They went to the backyard, and I watched through the window as Frank showed Tucker how to improve his throwing stance. Doris stayed with me but kept asking when they'd come back inside. When they came in, Frank read Doris 3 picture books, and she sat right next to him pointing at the pictures. Frank thanked me 4 separate times before he left, saying this was the best day he'd had in 5 years. Tucker asked when Grandpa could come back, and I said we'd figure out a regular schedule. After Frank left, Tucker was quieter than usual, and I asked if he was okay. He said Grandpa seemed nice, and he remembered him a little bit now from the photos. 2 weeks later, Gloria called and asked if she could come to the next visit with Frank. I said yes, but told her clearly that we wouldn't talk about Kyle, and the focus had to be on the kids, not the past. Gloria agreed immediately, and said she just wanted to know her grandchildren. The visit with both of them went smoothly because Gloria followed my rules and spent the whole time asking the kids about their lives now. 6 months after Kyle first showed up at my door demanding to move in, my life had finally settled into something stable. Tucker and Doris saw Frank and Gloria twice a month on Saturday afternoons, and the visits got easier each time. Kyle stopped showing up to supervised visits after the 4th one when Doris cried and Tucker refused to talk to him. The visitation center sent reports to the court, but we never heard anything from Kyle's lawyer about trying again. I got promoted to senior lead technologist with a significant raise and better hours. The house felt truly mine now with no threat of Kyle claiming half. Tucker made the all-star baseball team and Doris moved up to the advanced gymnastics class. I started sleeping through the night without waking up worried about what Kyle would do next. My family was small, but it was strong, and we'd survived something that could have broken us.